The stranger in the shadows. Daniel always had the feeling that someone was watching him. It wasn't just a passing thought. It stayed with him, growing stronger as he got older. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but strange things kept happening. Shadows moved when no one was there, and sometimes at night, he heard an odd hum outside his window. It wasn't a machine, nor was it the wind. It was something else. It all started when he was a child. Daniel remembered walking home from school one rainy afternoon. He felt a pair of eyes following him, but every time he turned around, the street was empty. Only the sound of the rain and his own footsteps filled the air. That day he ran all the way home, but the feeling didn't leave him. Years later, as a young man, Daniel tried to brush it off. "You're just paranoid," he told himself. Life was busy, and he worked hard to make ends meet. Yet, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It wasn't just in quiet moments or dark alleys. He felt it in broad daylight, in crowded places, and even in the safety of his apartment. One evening, while walking home from work, he saw her. It was just a glimpse at first, a tall figure standing under a dim streetlight. She was wearing a long coat, and her face was hidden by the shadow of a hood. Something about her didn't seem right. Her stance, her stillness, it was unnerving. Daniel's heart raced as he quickened his steps. When he glanced back, she was gone. "Maybe I imagined it," he thought, shaking his head. But deep down, he knew it wasn't his imagination. Over the next few days, Daniel started noticing her more often. She was always at a distance, watching him. Her glowing green eyes were impossible to miss. No one else seemed to notice her, though. Whenever Daniel tried to approach her, she vanished. It was as if she could disappear into thin air. One night, as Daniel walked down a quiet alley near his apartment, the feeling of being followed became unbearable. The air felt heavy, and the sound of his footsteps echoed loudly. He stopped and turned around. There she was, standing a few feet away. "Who are you?" Daniel shouted, his voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. She stepped closer, and the dim streetlight revealed her face. It wasn't human. Her features were sharp, her skin pale with a faint shimmer, and her glowing eyes seemed to look straight into his soul. Daniel froze. "You've been following me," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "What do you want?" Still, she didn't reply. Instead, she raised her hand. A soft light emerged from her palm, and for a moment, Daniel felt a strange warmth. It was like a memory he couldn't quite grasp, something familiar yet distant. Before he could say anything else, she turned and started walking away. "Wait," Daniel called out, running after her. But as he reached the end of the alley, she was gone. It was as if she had vanished into the night. Shaken, Daniel returned to his apartment. He locked the door and leaned against it, trying to catch his breath. His mind was racing. Who was she? What did she want? And most importantly, how was she able to disappear like that? He spent the rest of the night searching online for answers. He typed everything he could think of. Glowing eyes, disappearing woman, mysterious stalker. Most of the results were useless. Urban legends, conspiracy theories, and wild stories about aliens. Aliens, the word lingered in his mind longer than he expected. Could it be possible? The woman's glowing eyes, her strange appearance, it didn't seem human. But Daniel wasn't ready to believe such a wild idea. Not yet. As he closed his laptop, he noticed something strange on his arm. A faint, glowing mark had appeared, shaped like a small, intricate symbol. He touched it, but it didn't hurt. It felt warm, almost alive. Panic set in as he realized the mark hadn't been there before. That night, Daniel barely slept. Every creak and shadow in his apartment made him jump. He kept replaying the encounter in his head, trying to make sense of it. Who was she? And why was she following him? The next morning, Daniel's life felt different. The world seemed the same, but he didn't. The mark on his arm hadn't faded, and the memory of the woman's glowing eyes haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than he could imagine. As he stepped outside, he couldn't help but look over his shoulder. Somewhere, in the shadows, he was sure she was watching. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't just scared, he was curious. Patterns of the unseen. Daniel couldn't ignore the mark on his arm. He spent hours staring at it in the dim light of his apartment. The intricate design seemed to glow faintly in the dark, pulsating like a heartbeat. Every time he touched it, he felt a strange warmth spreading through his body, like an energy that wasn't his own. The mark wasn't fading, and it wasn't an illusion. By morning, Daniel was determined to find answers. He combed through his memory, trying to recall every strange moment in his life. The humming outside his window as a child, the shadows that moved when they shouldn't, and now this glowing mark. It all felt connected. But how? He grabbed a notebook and started jotting down everything he remembered. He listed the times he'd seen the woman, the way she vanished, and her unearthly appearance. The mark on his arm matched something he'd seen in the cryptic forums he visited last night. Symbols similar to this one were described as alien markings by conspiracy theorists. Was he really about to believe these wild ideas? Daniel sighed, closing his notebook. "This is crazy," he muttered to himself. But deep down, he couldn't deny the truth. Something extraordinary was happening, and he was at the center of it. Later that evening, Daniel decided to retrace his steps to where he first encountered the woman. He walked the same path through the quiet streets, keeping his eyes open for anything unusual. The air was cold, and the faint hum of the city filled the silence. As he reached the alley, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. On the brick wall where the woman had stood, faint lines glowed under the streetlight. He stepped closer, running his fingers over the markings. They were similar to the one on his arm, but larger and more complex. Suddenly, he felt the presence again. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his heartbeat quickened. He turned around, but the alley was empty. The shadows, however, seemed to shift unnaturally, as if they were alive. "Daniel," a soft voice called, startling him. He spun around to see the woman standing at the edge of the alley. She wasn't hiding this time. Her hood was down, revealing her pale, shimmering skin and glowing green eyes. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. The woman tilted her head, studying him. "I've been watching you for years," she said, her voice calm and melodic. "You are more than you know." Daniel stepped back, shaking his head. "What does that even mean? Why are you following me? What is this?" He pointed to the mark on his arm. She stepped closer, and he felt an overwhelming sense of calm, despite the chaos in his mind. "That mark is a part of you," she said. "It's a connection to me, to my people, and to something far greater than this world." Daniel's mind raced. "Your people? Are you saying you're not human?" The woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over the mark on his arm. Instantly, Daniel felt a surge of energy coursing through him. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he saw flashes of strange, vivid images, planets with twin suns, towering cities of glass, and beings that looked like her. When he snapped back to reality, he stumbled backward, gasping for air. What was that?" "Your truth," she said simply. Daniel felt overwhelmed. "Why me? Why have you been following me all these years?" She hesitated, her expression softening. "You are important, Daniel. You carry something within you, something that others want. If they find you, they will destroy you, and this world." Before he could ask more, a strange sound filled the air. It was a low, vibrating hum, growing louder with each second. The woman's expression changed to one of urgency. "They found us," she said. "Who?" Daniel asked, panicking. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his arm and pulled him into the shadows. "Stay close and don't make a sound," she whispered. The hum grew louder, and Daniel's eyes widened as he saw a dark shape hovering above the alley. It wasn't a helicopter or a drone. It was something far more advanced. The sleek, metallic craft emitted a faint glow, and its surface rippled like liquid metal. "They're here for you," the woman whispered. "But I won't let them take you." Before Daniel could respond, the craft released a beam of light that illuminated the alley. The woman stepped forward, raising her hand. A shimmering shield of energy appeared, blocking the light. "Run," she yelled. But Daniel didn't move. He couldn't leave her. "Not without you," he said, his voice firm. The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with something he didn't expect. Gratitude. "Then stay close. This is just the beginning." As the craft descended closer, Daniel realized his life was no longer his own. Whatever this was, he was a part of it now, and there was no turning back. The revelation. Daniel sat in stunned silence inside a dimly lit space that looked like a cross between a high-tech lab and an ancient temple. The air felt charged, as if humming with unseen energy. The woman, who now introduced herself as Zira, stood before him, her glowing eyes watching his every move. "You said I'm important," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "You need to explain. What does that mean? What am I?" Zara tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You are human," she began, her voice calm but firm. "But not entirely. Within you is a spark, a connection to my people. Your existence is the result of something extraordinary, something that was never supposed to happen." Daniel blinked, trying to process her words. "What are you talking about? I'm just a regular guy. I grew up in the suburbs, went to school, worked boring jobs. There's nothing extraordinary about me." Zira stepped closer, her shimmering skin catching the faint light. "Do you remember the mark on your arm?" she asked. Daniel instinctively looked down, even though his jacket now covered the glowing symbol. "Of course I do. How could I forget?" "That mark isn't just a coincidence," Zira said, her tone growing more intense. "It's a birthright, a beacon. It was dormant until now, hidden from those who would seek to use you. But something has changed, Daniel. They found you, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Who are they? Why are they after me? What do they want?" Zira let out a soft sigh, as if the weight of the universe rested on her shoulders. "There are factions across the stars," she explained. "Some seek to protect life, to guide it toward balance and harmony. Others see life as a resource to be exploited, controlled, and consumed. Your connection to my people makes you valuable, too valuable. You are the key to unlocking something ancient, something powerful. If they capture you, they will use you to open a door that must never be opened." Daniel stared at her, his mind racing. "You're saying I'm some kind of weapon?" "Not a weapon," Zira corrected. "A guardian. But only if you choose to be." "Choose?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "It doesn't feel like I have a choice. I don't even understand what's happening." Zira's expression softened. She raised her hand, and a faint glowing orb appeared in her palm. "Let me show you," she said. Before Daniel could protest, the orb floated toward him and enveloped him in a warm golden light. His surroundings melted away, replaced by a cascade of visions. He saw vast galaxies swirling in the void, planets teeming with life, and ancient structures carved from glowing crystals. He saw beings like Zira, standing in unity against monstrous, shadowy figures that seemed to consume everything in their path. And then he saw himself, or rather, a version of himself that didn't feel entirely human. He was standing at the center of it all, his arm raised as the mark on his skin blazed like a star. Power radiated from him, driving back the darkness. The vision ended as suddenly as it began, leaving Daniel gasping for air. He stumbled backward, his legs unsteady. What was that?" "Your potential," Zyra said softly. Your ancestors were part of something greater, Daniel. They were chosen to carry the spark of our people, to act as a bridge between our worlds. That legacy lives on in you. Daniel shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. Why me? Why now? Zyra hesitated, then spoke carefully. Because time is running out. The factions that hunt you have grown stronger. They've been watching this planet for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. Your awakening changes everything. They know you're here, and they will come for you. But you don't have to face this alone. Alone? Daniel laughed bitterly. Zyra, I'm not a hero. I don't know how to fight aliens or protect the world. I'm just trying to survive. Zyra stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You're more capable than you realize. The mark on your arm is not just a symbol. It's a gateway to your true potential. With training, you can unlock abilities that will allow you to defend yourself and those you care about. But you must trust me. Daniel took a deep breath, his thoughts swirling. Everything Zyra said sounded impossible, yet the evidence was staring him in the face. The mark, the visions, the strange energy he felt coursing through him. It couldn't all be a coincidence. Before he could respond, the room suddenly trembled, and a loud mechanical hum filled the air. Zyra's eyes widened. They found us, she said. Daniel's stomach dropped. Who? The factions. Zyra nodded, her expression grave. We need to move. Now. She grabbed his hand, and before he could protest, the walls around them shimmered and dissolved. They were standing in an open field under a star-filled sky, the air thick with tension. Above them, dark shapes loomed, their outlines glowing with a menacing red light. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but Zyra stood her ground. Remember what I told you, she said. You're not powerless, Daniel. You just have to believe in what you are. As the shadows descended, Daniel felt a surge of determination rise within him. He didn't understand everything that was happening, but one thing was clear. His life would never be the same again. The truth about Earth. The open field was quiet now, save for the hum of energy lingering in the air. The dark shapes that had pursued Daniel and Zyra moments before were gone, driven away by the strange, glowing shield Zyra had summoned at the last second. Daniel sat on the grass, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. What were those things? He asked, his voice hoarse. Zyra stood nearby, scanning the horizon with her glowing eyes. Hunters, she said finally. Machines designed to track and capture. They belong to the faction that wants you. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. I was just a regular guy yesterday. Now, I'm being chased by alien machines. Glowing marks are appearing on my body. And you're telling me I'm... What? Some kind of chosen one. Zyra turned to him, her expression serious. I know it's a lot to take in, but there's no time to ease you into this. You need to know the truth about Earth, about humanity, and about yourself. Daniel leaned back on his hands, trying to process her words. Fine, he said, exhaling sharply. Tell me everything. Zyra knelt in front of him, her shimmering skin catching the moonlight. Earth is not what you think it is, she began. It's not just a planet floating in the vastness of space. It's special, unique, a sanctuary. Daniel frowned. A sanctuary? For what? For life, Zyra said simply. Thousands of years ago, Earth became a refuge for species fleeing destruction across the galaxy. My people, the Zilloran, were among the first to arrive. We were fleeing a war, an ancient conflict with a faction called the Renderers. They seek to dominate, to control, and to extract power from anything and anyone they encounter. Daniel's head spun. So, you're saying humans? Humans are one of the youngest species on this planet, Zyra said, her tone softening. But your people are extraordinary. You have something the rest of us don't. Potential. The ability to grow, to adapt, to dream. That's why Earth became a sanctuary for so many. It wasn't just a hiding place. It was a chance for life to thrive again. But if Earth is a sanctuary, Daniel said, then why hasn't anyone told us? Why do humans think we're alone in the universe? Zira hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. Because we made it that way. The Zilloran and other species worked together to protect Earth, to shield it from the wars raging across the galaxy. We erased evidence of our presence and let humanity evolve on its own. We believed you deserved a chance to grow without interference. Daniel laughed bitterly. Well, that plan worked out great. Now I'm being hunted because of some glowing mark I didn't ask for. Zira looked up at him, her expression pained. I'm sorry, Daniel. You were never supposed to be dragged into this. The mark on your arm is a remnant of the Zilloran. It's a connection to our people, passed down through generations. It remained dormant in your bloodline until now. Why now? Daniel asked. What changed? Zira's jaw tightened. The Renderers. They'd found Earth. They'd been watching for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. When your mark activated, it sent out a signal, a beacon they couldn't ignore. That's why they're here. They believe you hold the key to unlocking something they've been searching for, a weapon, a power source, a force that could tip the balance of the galaxy in their favor. Daniel stared at her, his mind racing. And what if they're right? What if I am this key? Zira reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we must make sure they never use you. You have a choice, Daniel. You can run, hide, and hope they never find you. Or you can stand and fight, not just for yourself, but for Earth, for humanity, and for every species that calls this planet home. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He thought of his quiet life, his mundane routines, and the small, comfortable world he had known. All of it felt distant now, like a dream fading in the harsh light of reality. How? He asked finally. How do I fight something I don't even understand? Zira smiled faintly. You're not alone, Daniel. You have me, and you have the legacy of my people. The mark on your arm is more than just a symbol. It's a gateway to your true potential. If you're willing to learn, I can show you how to unlock it. Daniel hesitated, his gaze fixed on the faint glow of the mark beneath his sleeve. And if I fail? Zira's smile faded. Failure is not an option. If the Renderers take you, they won't just destroy Earth. They'll destroy everything. The weight of her words settled on Daniel's shoulders like a physical burden. He didn't want this responsibility. He didn't ask for it. But as he looked into Zira's glowing eyes, he saw something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. All right, he said, his voice steady. Teach me. Zira nodded, her expression resolute. Then we begin now. There's no time to waste. As the stars above them burned brightly, Daniel realized his life would never be the same. The truth about Earth, about himself, was far more incredible and far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. A war in the shadows. The training began almost immediately. Zira was relentless. Every day, she pushed Daniel to his limits, testing not only his physical endurance, but also his mental strength. At first, Daniel resisted, unsure of his ability to embrace the strange power within him. But with every lesson, he felt something awakening. A force deep inside him that was more than just a mark on his skin. It was raw, untapped energy, like a dormant volcano that had begun to stir. The first few days were disorienting. Zira would instruct him to meditate, her voice calm and soothing, guiding him to focus on the glowing mark on his arm. Feel the energy, she would say, her words gentle but insistent. Let it flow through you. Trust it. But it was difficult. Daniel was no mystic, no warrior. He was just a guy who worked at a mundane job, who had lived a life of comfort and routine. The idea of tapping into some otherworldly power seemed absurd. And yet, as the days passed, he could feel his mind becoming clearer, his senses heightened, his body stronger. Zira introduced him to basic techniques, ways to harness and focus the energy from the mark. She taught him how to control his breathing, how to center his thoughts, how to channel the power that he now realized had always been a part of him. "You are more than just human, Daniel," she would remind him each time he faltered. "You are the bridge between two worlds. Your ancestors were not ordinary people. They were chosen, just as you are." But it wasn't just about training. It was about understanding who he had become, who he had always been. Slowly, Daniel started to piece together the fragments of his past, things he hadn't remembered or had never understood. His family had always been strange, distant, but they had never mentioned anything about their origins. They were just a family, normal, simple, until now. As Daniel grew stronger, so did the urgency of the situation. The Renderis were closing in. Their presence on Earth was no longer a hidden threat. Zira's warnings became more frequent, her demeanor more serious. The enemy was relentless, and every day that passed without action brought them closer to their goal. "They know about you, Daniel," Zira told him one evening. Her eyes narrowed in concentration as she scanned a series of holographic maps. "Their scouts have infiltrated Earth's atmosphere. They've already started looking for the key, and they won't stop until they have you." Daniel clenched his fists, his thoughts spiraling. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready for war. "What do you mean by scouts?" Zira's expression hardened. "The Renderis send soldiers, hunters, beings of immense strength and intelligence, but their real weapon is their ability to infiltrate, to blend in. They could be anyone. Your neighbors, your coworkers, the people you pass on the street. You won't know who they are until it's too late." Daniel's stomach twisted. The world he had known, the safety of his daily life, was crumbling. "So, we're just supposed to, what? Wait for them to attack?" "We won't wait," Zira said sharply. "We take the fight to them." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time since everything had started, Daniel felt a flicker of doubt. "I don't know if I can do this. I'm just one person." Zira's eyes softened, but only slightly. "You are not just one person. You are part of something much bigger. You're the key, Daniel. But only if you accept it." Daniel stood in silence, looking at the strange weapon in his hands, a staff of shimmering crystal, crafted from the same energy he had learned to control. The weapon was a gift from Zira, but it felt foreign, unnatural. It wasn't just the weapon that unnerved him. It was the idea of becoming something he wasn't. A protector, a warrior, someone willing to fight and die for a cause he hadn't chosen. But the truth was undeniable. He had no choice. The enemy was here, and they wouldn't stop until they had destroyed everything. He could run, he could hide, but that would only delay the inevitable. And something deep inside him told him he couldn't turn his back on this fight. Not now, not ever. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's training grew more intense. Zira's lessons pushed him to his limits. She taught him how to harness his power in new ways, how to focus it into bursts of energy, how to shield himself from attacks, and how to sense the presence of the Renderis. With each lesson, his control grew. But so did his fear. What if he couldn't do it? What if the Renderis were too powerful? One evening, as he practiced his energy blasts in the empty field where they trained, Daniel heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the hum of a ship, far off in the distance. He turned to Zira, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're here," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "It's time." The air crackled with energy as Zira moved into position beside him. She raised her hand, and the landscape around them seemed to warp as she activated a cloaking field, hiding them from sight. The ship came closer, its massive, sleek body gliding through the air, casting a shadow over the earth. "This is it," Zira said, her tone grim. "The Renderis have arrived, and they will not leave until they have what they want." Daniel felt the weight of her words. He gripped his staff tightly, feeling the energy surge through him like a river unleashed. He was ready, or at least he had to be. Zara's voice broke through his thoughts. Remember, Daniel, you are not alone. You are the guardian of this world, and no matter what happens, you will fight for it. As the ship descended, Daniel realized that he was no longer the man he used to be. He had become something else, a protector, a warrior. The fate of the world was in his hands, and there was no turning back now. Betrayals and sacrifices. The battle had only just begun, but already Daniel could feel the weight of the conflict pressing down on him. The Renderis had arrived in force. Their ships hovered ominously over cities, casting dark, menacing shadows across the streets below. But it wasn't just the ships that unsettled him. It was the sense of betrayal that lingered in the air. Zira had warned him that not everyone could be trusted, that the fight against the Renderis would bring out the worst in people. Daniel had dismissed the thought, believing that in a crisis, alliances would hold, and everyone would rally together. But now he was starting to see the cracks in the fragile web of trust that had been woven around them. They had taken refuge in an underground base, hidden deep beneath the Earth's surface. It was an old Zillaran outpost, forgotten by time, its walls lined with strange symbols and technology far more advanced than anything Daniel had ever seen. It was supposed to be their stronghold, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. But the atmosphere in the base was thick with tension. Zira had given him a quiet corner to train in, away from the others. She was busy coordinating with the other resistance leaders, strategizing their next move against the Renderis. Daniel, however, couldn't focus. The events of the past few weeks had drained him, and his mind was still reeling from the intensity of the battle he'd just fought. But it wasn't the fight that troubled him. It was the betrayal he felt brewing. He had learned that not everyone within their ranks was on their side. There were whispers, shadows moving in places where they shouldn't be. Someone had been feeding information to the Renderis, sabotaging their efforts from within. And Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the traitor was closer than he thought. As he stood in the dimly lit room, practicing the energy blasts that had become second nature to him, the door opened. It was a familiar face, Kalen, one of the resistance leaders who had fought alongside them. His face was gaunt, and his eyes were filled with an emotion Daniel couldn't quite place. "Daniel," Kalen said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." Daniel lowered his staff and turned to face him. "About what?" Kalen stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. His expression was grim. "I've been doing some digging. I've learned things I didn't want to know." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Kalen looked around nervously, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Zira isn't who she says she is." Daniel's mind froze. "What do you mean?" "She's the only one who's been honest with me. She's been training me, showing me the truth about everything." Kalen shook his head. "That's exactly it. She's been showing you what she wants you to see. But there's more to her story, Daniel. She's not just a warrior, not just someone trying to save Earth. She's the leader of a faction of the Zillaran. A faction that's been planning to use Earth for their own purposes. Her people don't want to protect humanity. They want to control it." Daniel took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. "That's not possible. Zira, she's been guiding me. She's been teaching me everything. Why would she do that if she wanted to control me?" Kalen's eyes darkened. "Because you're the key, Daniel. You're the weapon they need. You're not just a guardian. You're the anchor. If they can control you, they can control everything. The future of both our worlds." For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak. His mind raced as he tried to process the weight of Kalen's words. Could it be true? Could Zira, the one person he trusted, have been lying to him all this time? "I don't believe you," Daniel said finally, his voice hoarse. "Zira's been nothing but honest with me. She's been helping me understand who I am." Kalen sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but I've seen the signs. I've seen the way she's manipulated things, how she's kept certain truths hidden from us all. She's playing a game, Daniel, and you're just a pawn in it." Daniel's heart twisted, but he refused to believe it. I won't betray her. Not after everything we've been through together. Kellen's face hardened. You can't afford loyalty if it puts everyone at risk. Before Daniel could respond, the door to the room flew open. Zira stood in the doorway, her glowing eyes filled with urgency. Daniel, we don't have much time, she said, her voice tight with tension. The Renderis are closer than we thought. We need to move now. Daniel stood frozen, caught between two conflicting forces. Kalen's words echoed in his mind, filling him with doubt. But Zyra's presence, her urgency, pulled him in a different direction. Daniel, come on, Zyra urged, stepping forward. We don't have the luxury of time. The enemy is already on the move. For a moment, Daniel hesitated, torn between trust and suspicion. But then he looked at Zyra. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw the same woman who had taught him to believe in his power, to embrace the truth of his origins. He couldn't just turn his back on her. I'm coming, Daniel said, his voice steady. But we need to talk later. About everything. Zyra nodded, her expression softening for just a moment. Later, she promised. They left the room quickly, Kalen's eyes following them, filled with something unreadable. As Daniel followed Zyra down the narrow hallway, the weight of the situation pressed down on him like a suffocating cloud. He didn't know who to trust anymore. He didn't know where the truth lay. All he knew was that the world was on the brink of destruction, and the battle for its future was far from over. As they reached the command center, the sound of alarms blared through the base. The Renderis were close. Zyra turned to him, her voice urgent. Get ready, Daniel. This is it. But as the door to the command center opened, Daniel knew that the true battle had just begun. And it wasn't just against the Renderis. It was against the betrayal that lurked in the shadows. The final stand. The command center was chaotic. Alarms blared through the cold, metallic walls, their shrill sound a constant reminder that time was running out. Resistance fighters rushed back and forth, preparing weapons and equipment, their faces grim with the knowledge of what was about to unfold. Outside, the Renderis had begun their assault, their massive ships descending from the sky, like vultures ready to claim their prey. The city was under siege. Daniel stood at the center of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. His thoughts raced, but his mind kept returning to one question. What now? Zyra stood beside him, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a fierce urgency. Her eyes, normally soft and unreadable, were now sharp, focused, calculating. She had been the one to train him, to prepare him for this moment, but the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. They've breached the outer defenses, one of the commanders said, his voice tight. We don't have long before they reach us. Zyra turned to him, her expression hardening. Hold them off as long as you can. We need time to launch the counterattack. Daniel looked between the commander and Zyra, his hands clenched into fists. And me. What am I supposed to do? Zyra's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to dissolve. She didn't speak, but her look said it all. You're ready. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel had come a long way since their first encounter. He had unlocked powers he didn't fully understand, but he had learned to control them, at least to some degree. And now, it was time to put everything he had learned to the test. He reached for his staff, the weapon Zyra had given him, feeling its energy pulse through his fingertips. The weapon was more than just a physical tool. It was a conduit for the power inside him, a focus for the strange, ancient energy that had been dormant in his bloodline for generations. With a deep breath, he steadied himself, allowing the energy to flow through him, to connect with the weapon and with the world around him. The Renderis won't stop, Zyra said, her voice low, but resolute. They will come for you, Daniel, and they will not be merciful. I know, Daniel replied. His voice was steady, more confident than he had ever felt before. But they won't take me without a fight. Zyra nodded, stepping back as the final preparations were made. The resistance was ready, but the truth was they were vastly outnumbered. The Renderis had come prepared, their forces overwhelming, their weapons devastating. They had no chance of winning this battle without a leader, without someone who could tip the scales. That person was Daniel. The first wave of the Renderis forces arrived, shadowy, armored figures descending from the sky, their ships opening fire on the city below. Explosions rocked the ground, and the resistance fighters scrambled to respond, their weapons firing into the air. But it was clear they were outmatched. But Daniel didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his staff glowing with an intensity that made the air hum. He could feel the energy within him rising, like a wave crashing over him, filling him with power. He wasn't just using the staff anymore. He was becoming it, channeling the energy of his ancestors, his heritage, his purpose. "Now, Daniel," Zyra called, her voice sharp. "Focus. Don't let them overwhelm you." With a single focused motion, Daniel raised his staff, and a blast of energy erupted from its tip, striking the first wave of attackers with a force that sent them flying backward. The ground trembled beneath his feet as the Renderis soldiers struggled to regain their footing. Daniel didn't wait for them to recover. He moved swiftly, his body attuned to the power flowing through him. He was fast, faster than he had ever been. The mark on his arm burned with energy, and he could feel the full force of his abilities coming to life. Each swing of his staff unleashed waves of destructive power, knocking out entire squads of Renderis soldiers with ease. But even as the battle raged on, Daniel could feel the Renderis' true strength. They were relentless, and they had no intention of retreating. The sound of weapons clashing, the roar of explosions, and the cries of the fallen filled the air. The resistance fighters were brave, but they were outclassed. Their weapons were no match for the alien technology the Renderis possessed. Amidst the chaos, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive Renderis warship descending into the city center, its guns targeting the heart of the resistance base. He could feel the weight of the ship's weaponry, a threat that could obliterate everything in its path. If they didn't stop it now, they would lose everything. Without thinking, Daniel charged forward, pushing through the ranks of Renderis soldiers. His staff crackled with energy as he drew on everything he had learned, everything he had become. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future of Earth, for the people he had come to care about, for the dream of a world where humanity could thrive free from oppression. The warship loomed closer, and Daniel knew this was his moment. He focused all of his energy into a single point, the core of the warship. With a forceful cry, he slammed his staff into the ground, sending a massive shockwave through the air. The earth beneath him cracked open, and a surge of energy shot toward the warship, colliding with its shields. The impact sent a shockwave through the battlefield, knocking Daniel to the ground. He gritted his teeth, fighting to stay conscious. The pain was unbearable, but he pushed through it. As the smoke cleared, he saw the warship's shields flicker and fail. It was vulnerable. With every ounce of strength he had left, Daniel raised his staff one final time. He released everything: the power, the anger, the fear, and the hope. The energy exploded from the staff, striking the warship with a force so intense that it shattered its hull and sent it plummeting to the ground. The battlefield fell silent for a moment, the roar of combat ceasing as the Renderis soldiers looked on in shock. They had lost their advantage. But it wasn't over. The Renderis were not ones to accept defeat so easily. They regrouped, rallying their forces for a final, desperate push. But Daniel knew one thing: they had won a victory, and that victory would give the resistance the hope they needed to continue the fight. Zara appeared beside him, her expression one of admiration and respect. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved them." Daniel looked around, seeing the survivors of the resistance rallying, their spirits lifted by his actions. He had become the leader they needed. He had become the hero he never thought he could be. But in the distance, he saw a a shadow watching from afar. The Renderis were not finished yet, and the war was far from over. Daniel knew that the fight for Earth had just begun. But this time, he wasn't alone. And together, they would win.